gorgeous. Welcome back to Unapologetically 50 Plus, where we talk about real life, real healing, and real growth, especially for those of us stepping into our next chapter with intention. Today is episode 3 in our Boundaries and Becoming series, and we're going to talk about being strong or stuck when your boundaries become too rigid. But before we get started, I have one huge favor to ask. If you find any value or enjoy the content, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I truly appreciate your support. You know, there's a certain type of boundary that doesn't get talked about enough. And I'm not talking about the kind you learn, you're just learning to set after years of saying yes when you meant no. Not the kind that helps you reclaim your time, your energy, or your peace. I'm talking about the kind that's built like concrete, unmovable, unbendable, unchangeable. The kind of boundary that sounds like, I don't need anybody. One mistake and we're done. I said what I said, period. Now, on the surface, that sounds strong, right? Clear, bold, no nonsense. But what if I told you that strength can turn into stuckness? That sometimes what we call being firm is actually fear. And what we call having boundaries is actually us trying to control the world around us so we never get hurt again. Today, we are talking about rigid boundaries, the kind that may have started out as self protection but slowly turned into self isolation. The kind that keeps you safe but also keeps you stuck. Let's start with what inflexible boundaries actually look like. Because they don't always show up as cold or defensive, sometimes they're disguised as strength. Sometimes they sound like wisdom when they're really rooted in fear. Things like, I don't do second chances. If you hurt me once, we're done. I don't explain myself to anybody. I don't let people get close, period. Now, look, I get it. That kind of clarity feels powerful, especially if you've been walked over or dismissed for most of your life. Or if you were always the strong one, the reliable one, the one that took care of everybody else but left nothing for yourself. But inflexibility isn't clarity, it's control. And when your boundaries don't leave room for change, growth, or even communication, they're not boundaries anymore, they're walls. And while walls might protect you, they also block you from love and connection. Now, let me pause right here and let's make an important distinction between rigid boundaries and walls because they're not the same. A rigid boundary is still a boundary, it's just overcorrected. It's a response to past harm or overextension that's become too strict, too unforgiving, and too one size fits all. It's your voice, but it's unyielding. It says, I've learned my lesson and I'm not open to revisiting it. It comes from a desire for safety, but it can shut down growth. But a wall, that's different. A wall is usually built unconsciously. It's not communicated clearly. It doesn't say, here's what I need. It says, you don't get in, period. Walls are silent. Rigid boundaries are loud. Block love. Rigid boundaries test it. Walls say nothing at all. Rigid boundaries say too much with no room for response. So if you're wondering what you're operating from, ask yourself, did I clearly communicate what I need or am I just avoiding? Is this boundary based on a real value or a past wound I haven't healed? Do I shut down connection entirely or do I leave space for safe engagement? Remember, a wall doesn't want repair. A rigid boundary, it's just afraid of getting it wrong again. And the beautiful thing about healing is you can take that rigidness and reshape it into something flexible but firm, protective but still present. So, where does this come from? Most people don't start off rigid. In fact, a lot of the women I coach who have the hardest, most inflexible boundaries used to have none at all. They overgave, they overexplained, they let things slide for the sake of peace. They silenced themselves in order to avoid conflict. And eventually, something in them snapped. They said never again, and they meant it. So they swung from no boundaries to rigid ones, from being over available to being completely unavailable. And that swing, that overcorrection, it makes sense. It's a part of the process, but it's not the destination. Because if you're stuck in that place too long, you start living behind emotional glass. You can see people, but you can't touch them. You can hear love, but you don't let it in. You're not protected, you're just alone. So let's talk about what that costs you, especially in your relationships. Because rigid boundaries sound good in theory, but in real life, they kill intimacy and they shut down communication. They make people feel like they have to tiptoe around you. You think you're being clear, but what they're receiving is there's no space for me here. Not to grow, not to mess up, not to try again. And I'm not talking about tolerating disrespect or lowering your standards. I'm talking about leaving room for humanity, yours and theirs. Because not every boundary needs to be a locked door. Sometimes it can be a gate with a bell, with conditions, with space to talk, reflect, and evolve. So, what does a healthy boundary actually look like? It's firm but not rigid. It's consistent but responsive. It's grounded in your current needs, not your old wounds. It sounds like I value honesty. And if something feels off, I want us to be able to talk about it. Or that crossed a line for me. Let's talk about how we move forward. Or even, I'm not comfortable with that right now, but I'm open to revisiting it if something shifts. You feel the difference? One version shuts everything down, the other holds space for clarity and care at the same time. That's strength, that's softness, that's emotional maturity. Now, I already know some of you are thinking, but if I soften, I'll be taken advantage of. If I open up, I'll get hurt again. If I bend, I'll break. And I hear you. But here's what I've learned in my own journey and what I teach my clients. Softness is not weakness. Flexibility is not foolishness. Adjusting doesn't mean erasing yourself. It means you trust yourself enough to know you can handle what comes. You can hold your boundary and still make space for communication. You can protect your peace without hardening your heart. That's the kind of boundary that doesn't just protect, it supports connection, it supports growth, it supports you. So, as we close this episode, let me ask you one more time. Are you stuck or are you strong or are you stuck? Because there's nothing wrong with having standards, but if those standards don't evolve with you, they become a cage. You are not the same woman you were 10 years ago, and your boundaries shouldn't be either. You are allowed to change, you are allowed to heal, and you're allowed to soften. And if you're in a season where you're trying to figure out what kind of boundaries you need now, not what you needed back then, I invite you to explore my Rediscovering Purpose and Passion Guide. And you can find this in my Stand store along with many other resources designed to support your healing, your clarity, and your becoming. Also, drop me a comment and let me know, is there a boundary in your life that's gotten too tight? Maybe too heavy, too hard? In my next episode of Boundaries and Becoming, we're going to discuss movable boundaries and mixed signals and why inconsistency damages trust. So please make sure you come back for that episode. That will be episode 4. All right, thank you guys again so much for joining me. Please remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with a woman that you know might need to hear this as well. All right, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.